Close your eyes for just a moment. Not yet, not fully. Just enough to let the edges of the world soften. Let the hard lines of wherever you are right now begin to blur at the corners. The way a candle flame blurs when you've been staring at it long enough that it becomes less a flame and more a feeling. That is where we are going tonight. Not forward, never forward. We are going back. Back through centuries that have folded themselves quietly into the earth, back through stone corridors that still carry the faint warmth of fires that burned 2,000 years ago, back to a place where the ground itself breathes, where mineral-rich water rises up from deep within the earth with a slow, patient heat, as if the planet is sighing. We are going to Bath, England. But not the Bath you might know from postcards or Georgian terraces or the scent of cream tea drifting from an open doorway. We are going to the Bath that existed long before any of that, the sacred, steaming, impossibly beautiful Bath of the Roman Empire. The year is somewhere between the 1st and 4th century of the Common Era. The legions have long since settled their roads into the green hills. The temple has risen. The baths have been filled. And tonight you are a visitor. The stone beneath your feet is warm. The air smells of mineral water and cedarwood smoke. And you are already safe. Before we step fully through that arched doorway, before the steam wraps itself around your shoulders like a cloak woven from warm cloud, take one slow breath. Through the nose. Hold it gently, the way you might hold a small bird. And let it go. There is no hurry here. That is perhaps the most extraordinary thing about this place, this ritual, this world we are quietly entering together. The Romans who built these baths understood something that the modern world has mostly forgotten, that rest is not a reward you earn at the end of effort. Rest is the foundation upon which everything else is built. The bath was not an indulgence, it was a necessity, a sacrament, almost. And this channel, this quiet corner of the world where history is whispered rather than shouted, exists to carry you exactly there. If these journeys bring you something, even something as small as one easier breath before sleep, consider leaving a quiet mark of your presence, a subscription, a gentle tap of the bell. It costs you nothing but a moment, and it means that tomorrow night, and the night after that, another journey will be waiting for you. New cities, new centuries, new rooms filled with candlelight and the scent of old stone. But for now only this. The doorway is just ahead. The torchlight on the other side is amber and gold and impossibly warm. And the water in the great bath is already rising with steam. Let us go inside. There is something the ground knows that the mind does not. You feel it the moment your sandaled foot crosses the threshold of the outer courtyard, a faint, persistent warmth rising up through the paving stones, as though the earth beneath this particular patch of England has been quietly holding its breath for centuries, and only now, beneath the weight of your footstep, does it exhale. It is not the warmth of sunlight on stone, though the late afternoon sun does rest its amber light across the carved columns at the far end of the yard. This warmth is older, it comes from somewhere below, somewhere the eye cannot follow and the mind can only imagine. This is Aquae Sulis. The Romans gave this place a name that married two worlds, Aquae, meaning waters, and Sulis, the name of the goddess the local Celtic people had honoured here long before the first Roman sandal ever pressed into British soil. She was a deity of healing springs, of warm places, of the sacred and the inexplicable. And when the legions arrived and found a place where scalding water rose unbidden from the cold English ground, they did not dismiss the local gods, they absorbed them, they built temples around them. They poured their own mythology into the same vessel and let it steep until something entirely new and entirely extraordinary was born. The courtyard you're standing in now is wide and well proportioned, bordered on three sides by covered colonnades whose stone pillars are thick as old oak trunks and carved at their capitals with scrollwork that catches the eye the way a flowing river catches sunlight, always moving, always still. Between the columns, the evening air moves in gentle curtains, carrying with it the persistent mineral scent of the spring waters, and underneath that, faint and sweet, the smoke of incense from the temple altar just around the corner. It is not an unpleasant smoke. It is the kind that settles on the back of the tongue like a memory. Warm, herbal, slightly resinous, as though cedar and dried bay leaves have been folded together and laid carefully on a slow-burning coal. The paving stones beneath you are limestone, quarried from the hills not far from here, and they have been laid with a care that speaks of pride as much as practicality. Each stone is cut to a uniform thickness and fitted so closely to its neighbour that the joints between them are barely a fingernail's width. Where the feet of thousands of visitors have walked over years and decades, the surface has been worn to a gentle smoothness, not crumbled or broken, but polished, the way a river stone is polished through patient and repeated contact with the world. In the low slanting light of late afternoon, the worn patches catch the sun and gleam softly, like the surface of still water. Along the inner wall of the colonnade, a series of niches have been cut into the stone at shoulder height. Each niche sits a small clay lamp, its flame barely larger than a thumbnail, burning with a faint orange steadiness that seems almost to breathe, expanding and contracting in the slow, even rhythm that only a well-sheltered flame achieves. The light they cast is minimal, almost symbolic, and that is perhaps precisely the point. These lamps are not for seeing by, they are for atmosphere, for acknowledgement, for the quiet understanding that this is a place where even light must be gentle. You pause beside one of the lamps and look closely at the clay vessel that holds it. It has been shaped on a wheel, you can tell. There is a faint spiral lineation in the clay, the ghost of a potter's fingers running from the base to the rim in a slow helix. The oil inside is olive oil, rendered pale gold in the lamplight, and it has been filled recently enough that the level is still high, the flame steady and centered. Someone tended these lamps this morning. Someone climbed this colonnade with a small vessel of oil and a lit taper, and moved from niche to niche in the early blue quiet before the visitors arrived, keeping the light alive. There is something deeply comforting in that thought, the idea of routine care, of someone's daily morning gesture echoing forward through the centuries to reach you now in the amber haze of this particular afternoon. Beyond the far end of the courtyard, the entrance to the bath complex proper announces itself not with drama but with proportion. The archway is wide and tall, framed with dressed stone that has been painted, yes, painted, in a rich terracotta red that has faded to something closer to the colour of old rose petals, dusty and warm and beautiful in its imperfection. Above the arch, a carved inscription in neat Roman letters identifies the complex and invokes the goddess, though you do not need to read the Latin to understand what it means. The meaning is in the warmth of the air that flows outward from the arch, in the soft roar of water that reaches you even from here, low and constant like the sound of rain heard from inside a well-built house. The sound is a boundary. On this side of it, the world still holds the noise of the town, a cartwheel somewhere in the distance, the rise and fall of voices in a language you almost recognize, the sharp, bright note of a bronze bell being struck at a stall near the southern gate. But the moment you step through that arch, all of that will recede. The stone will absorb it, the steam will soften its edges, and what will remain will be something older and quieter. The sound of water finding its way through stone and the slow, measured breathing of a world that has learned to be still. But you are not through the arch yet. For now, you stand in the courtyard and let the place settle around you. You watch a sparrow that has found its way between the columns and is now walking along the top of the low inner wall with the perfect confidence of a creature that knows it belongs exactly where it is. It pauses, tips its head to one side as though reading an inscription that only birds can understand, then lifts itself into the air and is gone upward, into the amber light, into the open sky above the colonnade where thin threads of steam from the springs below rise and dissolve and rise again. You take another slow breath. The mineral scent of the water is stronger now, closer, almost sweet beneath its mineral edge, the way certain stones smell after rain, when the earth opens briefly and shares something of its interior, The warmth rises from below. The light falls from above. And everything between the two, the stone, the lamplight, the painted arch, the scent of incense and old oil, and the particular clean coolness of an English afternoon, arranges itself around you like a room you have been in before. Some version of a dream you cannot quite recall upon waking. You step forward. The arch receives you. The temple stands to the north of the baths, and to walk toward it is to feel the air change in ways that are difficult to articulate but impossible to ignore. It begins as a slight thickening of the atmosphere, the way the air near a body of water is somehow more present than ordinary air, more textured, more insistent against the skin. This is the breath of the sacred precinct, the temenos as the Romans called it, the bounded sacred space within which the ordinary rules of the world are gently suspended. Outside the temenos, a man is a citizen, a merchant, a soldier, a husband. Inside it, he is something smaller and something larger simultaneously, a mortal standing at the edge of the divine. The temple itself is classical in its architecture, unmistakably Roman in its bones, while wearing certain local characteristics in its ornamentation that remind you this place exists at a crossroads where one civilization has grafted itself carefully onto another. The podium on which it stands raises the entire structure, several steps above the surrounding precinct, and those steps are worn at their centres in the same gentle way as the courtyard paving stones, pressed smooth by the feet of the faithful across many generations, until each step holds a shallow, almost loving depression at its midpoint, a record of every soul that climbed toward this particular threshold. The 4 columns of the front portico are painted or were painted. The paint has weathered now to a ghostly presence, visible only in the recessed shadows of the carved details where traces of deep red and warm ochre cling in the protected grooves like the last embers of a dying fire. They are Corinthian columns topped with capitals of extraordinary complexity, each acanthus leaf carved with a precision that suggests the sculptor worked not by daylight, which would have been too honest, too merciless, but by lamplight, which grants shadow a role in the composition and allows the stone to breathe with a kind of depth that direct light never permits. Between the columns of the portico you can see the great pediment, the triangular stone face that crowns the entrance, and it is here that the temple reveals its most extraordinary feature. At the centre of the pediment, enclosed within a circular shield of carved stone, floats a face. Not a human face, precisely, not an animal face. Something between, something older, something that the stonecutter clearly approached with a mixture of skill and reverence, as though the chisel itself understood it was working in dangerous proximity to something real. The face is framed by great spreading wings, or perhaps they are serpents or oak branches. It is difficult to be certain, and that ambiguity feels intentional, as if the artist understood that precision would have diminished rather than clarified. The expression on the face is not angry. It is not peaceful either. It is watchful, the expression of a being that has been watching for a very long time, and has developed a patience so complete it resembles serenity without actually being it. This is the face of the genius loci, the spirit of the place, and it has been looking out over this precinct since the temple was completed, through every season of every year, through every generation of worshippers, through every empire and every quiet dissolution. Below the pediment, inside the dim shelter of the portico, the great doors of the temple stand open. They are bronze, not the bright bronze of new castings, but the deep, complicated bronze of age, the colour of a forest pool seen from above, green and black and gold in shifting proportions depending on the angle of light. The hinges are massive, the kind of hardware that suggests the doors are not opened and closed lightly or frequently, but with ceremony, with intention, with the understanding that the act of opening a sacred door is itself a form of prayer. Through the open doors, incense smoke rolls outward in slow, unhurried exhalations. The scent that reaches you is extraordinary, not the single note of any one plant, but a chord of many, something warm and resinous beneath, probably frankincense or pitch pine, something herbal and green in the middle register, perhaps rosemary or myrtle, and above that, lighter and almost sweet, the ghost of something floral that you cannot name, only feel. It settles on the back of your throat like a warm hand, and you find, without having decided to, that you are breathing more slowly. In the precinct before the temple steps, the great altar stands. It is not a small, delicate thing, it is a substantial presence, roughly shoulder height, carved from the same local limestone as everything else, and therefore holding the same warm grey-gold colour that characterises all the stone of this place. On its front face, carved in shallow relief, a scene of offering, a toga-clad figure pours libation from a jug over a small flame, while animals you can make out the horns of an ox stand in patient attendance. The carving has the calm confidence of official Roman art, every figure composed and proportioned, every gesture legible and correct. But around the base of the altar, less official, are other marks. Small votive tablets have been propped or wedged into every crevice, thin sheets of bronze or lead, some barely larger than a playing card, each inscribed with a petition to the goddess. You lean close enough to read a few, though the Latin is dense and the incised letters small. One reads, in careful if not entirely grammatical Latin, something about a stolen cloak, the petitioner asking Sulis Minerva to bring sickness upon whoever stole it, and to not permit them peace until the cloak is restored. Another asks for healing of an eye complaint. Another, more obliquely, asks only that the goddess know the name of the writer and hold it gently. That last one stays with you. Know my name and hold it gently. What a thing to ask of a god. What a complete and human thing. Around the precinct, pigeons move along the tops of low walls with the unhurried confidence of creatures who have never been chased. A pair of them share something near the base of the altar steps, something grain-sized found in the gap between two paving stones, and the soft clucking sound they make is so domestic, so deeply ordinary, that it does something unexpected to the atmosphere. Makes the sacred feel inhabited rather than remote, lived in rather than merely revered. The late afternoon sun now clears the top of the temple portico and sends a single wide bar of gold light across the precinct floor, cutting from the temple steps to the far colonnade in a diagonal that slowly, almost imperceptibly, moves as you watch it. Everything moves here. The smoke from the altar, the pigeons, the shadows of the column capitals lengthening as the sun descends. Everything moves, and yet everything is perfectly, deeply still. Nothing prepares you for the scale of it. You have passed through the entrance hall with its mosaic floor, a geometric pattern of red and cream tesserae, each tile barely larger than your thumbnail, fitted together with such patience and precision that the overall design seems to float above the ground rather than rest upon it. And you have moved through a vaulted corridor where the stone above your head curves in a smooth barrel arch, and the sound of your footsteps has changed from the open resonance of the courtyard to something closer and warmer, bounced back to you from the curved stone ceiling in a way that makes even a quiet footfall sound significant. And then the corridor opens. And there it is. The Great Bath. The pool itself is large enough that its far end seems, in the dense, rolling steam that rises from its surface, to be almost theoretical, a suggestion of stone and water somewhere beyond the veil of vapour, present to the mind before it fully registers to the eye. The water is a colour that is very difficult to name accurately. It is not quite green, not quite blue, not quite grey. It is all three simultaneously, with an additional quality of translucence that comes from the minerals suspended within it, the iron and the calcium and the various dissolved stones that the water has been carrying up from its underground journey for longer than any human record. In certain lights, particularly in the early morning when the sun comes through the high clerestory windows and falls at a low angle across the surface, the water appears almost bronze, the same deep, complicated colour as the temple doors, though the earth and the sky have arrived at the same conclusion by entirely different routes. Today the light is the late warm light of afternoon, and it enters through those high windows in long, near horizontal bars that cut through the steam like quiet theatre lighting, illuminating a column of vapour here, a section of carved stone there, drift of floating petals where someone has scattered them on the water from above. The steam catches each bar of light and holds it, so that the interior of the bath hall is full of these glowing columns, soft, shifting, immensely beautiful, and moving through them is like walking through a room made of warm, luminous cloud. The bath is surrounded on all four sides by a wide stone walkway, the ambulatory, and on the far side of the ambulatory, a colonnade of pillars supports the roof of the covered hall. The pillars here are not as slender and elegant as those in the outer courtyard. They are heavier, more substantial, because they carry a more serious burden. Their stone has darkened over the years with moisture and the residue of smoke from the lamps and braziers that warm the hall on cold days, and this darkening gives them a gravity that the paler stone of the exterior lacks. They look in their dark patience like very old trees. Between the pillars' arched openings look into smaller side rooms, apoditeria, changing rooms where wooden benches line the walls and small cubicles have been partitioned off with hung fabric. You can see through one of these arched openings a pair of sandals left on a bench, their leather straps worn and soft, one of them slightly collapsed on its side as though its owner left in something approaching contentment, the unhurried carelessness of someone who knows they have time. A folded linen cloth rests on the bench beside the sandals, a clay oil flask sits on the floor beneath, its stopper still in place. Back on the ambulatory, the scale of the pool reasserts itself. The bath is rectangular and long enough that it takes a full, slow minute to walk from one end to the other if you move at the pace that this place naturally imposes, which is the pace of someone who has nowhere else to be. The pool's edges are lined with large flat stones, and these edges are carved with a continuous channel, a lip wide enough to sit on, which is clearly their intended purpose. Along the near edge, 4 visitors are currently seated on this ledge, their feet dangling in the water, their bodies relaxed in the various attitudes of people who have nowhere to be. One is leaning back on both hands, face tipped upward toward the light, eyes closed. Tone is in quiet conversation with a companion, gesturing occasionally with a slow hand. One is alone and still, watching the surface of the water with an attention that seems less like observation and more like a kind of prayer. The sound inside the hall is layered and complex. Beneath everything, the fundamental sound of the spring, water entering the pool from the lead-lined channel at the northern end with a low, continuous roar that is somehow both white noise and music, filling the hall with a sound that the ear quickly incorporates into silence. Over this, the softer, intermittent sounds of movement through water, the gentle displacement of a leg swung slowly back and forth beneath the surface, the quiet ripple sound of someone stepping carefully down the stone steps at the shallow end, and above all of this the human sounds, low voices, occasional laughter that echoes warmly off the vaulted ceiling and dissipates into the steam before it can become obtrusive, and here and there the sound of water being lifted in cupped hands and poured back, a sound like the smallest possible waterfall, intimate and endlessly satisfying. The floor of the ambulatory is lead-lined in the sections closest to the pool, where the splash and overflow of the spring water have made waterproofing a necessity rather than a luxury. The lead has a particular look that stone lacks, a dull, soft sheen, neither reflective nor fully matte, the colour of a sky that cannot decide between cloud and clearing. It is warm underfoot despite its metal nature, because the hypocaust heating that runs beneath sections of this floor sends warmth up through the structure in slow, even currents. You crouch and press one hand flat against the lead surface. The warmth that meets your palm is extraordinary, not the sharp warmth of fire, not the ambient warmth of sunlit stone, but something more fundamental, more intimate, the warmth of a living system, a body, something that breathes and circulates. You hold your hand there and let the warmth travel up through your fingers, your palm, your wrist, and you understand, not intellectually, but in the quiet, certain way that the body understands things before the mind catches up, why people have been coming to this place for centuries. The water continues to rise. The steam continues to drift. And somewhere above the vaulted ceiling, through lead sheeting and dressed stone and sky, The afternoon sun continues its slow arc toward the west. The warmth of the Roman bath complex is not an accident. It is not a gift bestowed by circumstance. It is, its own way, tone of the most remarkable feats of engineering that the ancient world produced, not because of its spectacle, but because of its invisibility. Most engineering announces itself. Aqueducts arc across valleys on rows of noble arches. Bridges span rivers with confident stone spans. Amphitheatres rise from the earth in tiers of carved stone that can be seen for miles. But the engineering that keeps this bath warm is entirely hidden. It lives in the space between the floor you walk on and the earth below it, in a forest of small brick columns called pillae that stand in the dark and the heat and perform their function without being seen, without being thanked, without ever receiving so much as a glance from the people whose comfort they exist to provide. To understand the hypocaust, the Roman underfloor heating system, you must first understand that the floor you are walking on is not the floor. The real floor, the structural floor, is below. The surface you feel beneath your feet is a suspended platform, raised on the pillae, those low columns of brick, each one roughly the height of a person's knee, spaced at regular intervals across the entire underfloor space, like a field of patient sentinels. In the gaps between these columns, hot air circulates, driven from the furnace room that sits at the building's edge, where slaves called stokers feed a continuous supply of wood into the mouth of the prefurnium, the furnace opening. The heat that enters this underfloor space is intense, far more intense than would be comfortable against the skin. But by the time it has travelled through the system, rising through the pillae space, warming the suspended floor above, and then continuing its journey up through box tiles built into the walls, hollow ceramic blocks that line the interior walls and allow the warm air to travel upward, heating the room from floor to ceiling in slow, even progression. By the time it has done all of this work, it arrives at the room's interior air as a gentle, pervasive warmth that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. This is why the Roman bath feels warm in a way that a room warmed by a central fire never quite does. A fire warms the air in front of it and leaves the corners cold. A fire creates a warmth that has a direction, an orientation, a side you must face to receive it. The hypocaust creates warmth that has no origin visible to the occupant. It simply exists, evenly distributed, constant, as natural as the warmth of a summer afternoon. Certain rooms within the bath complex are warmer than others, and this is not an accident either. The caldarium, the hot room, is situated closest to the furnace, so that the travel distance of the warm air is minimal and its temperature at the point of delivery is highest. Here the floor is almost too warm to stand on with bare feet, and it is the custom of bathers to wear wooden-soled sandals patterns when moving through this room, the soft knock of wood on heated tile adding one more note to the complex percussion of the bath. The air in the caldarium is thick and hot, close to uncomfortable for those accustomed to cooler climates, and the steam that hangs in it is not the gentle drifting steam of the great bath, but a denser, more insistent presence, a warm hand pressed over the face, not unpleasant if you breathe into it slowly and allow your lungs to adjust. Farther from the furnace, the tepidarium, the warm room, offers a more temperate welcome. This is the room of transition, the room that mediates between the world outside and the deep heat of the caldarium, and as such it has a quality of perfect equilibrium. It is warm enough to be comfortable, cool enough to be bearable. It is the room in which conversation happens naturally, where the body has arrived at a temperature of ease, and the mind, relieved of the task of managing physical discomfort, opens itself to other things. Friendships have been made in tepidaria, business arrangements concluded, philosophical debates begun, poems composed, at least in the mind, while the tile walls radiated their gentle heat and the lamplight made everyone's face look equally kind. And then there is the frigidarium, the cold room, which is not cold in any painful sense, but simply cooler, a deliberate contrast to the heated rooms, a refreshment of the senses offered at the end of the bathing sequence. The plunge pool here is unheated spring water, and stepping into it after the caldarium produces a sensation that is, by all accounts, extraordinary. The entire surface of the skin tightening at once, a great indrawn breath, a sudden clarity of mind that arrives like the first full note of a bell. It is uncomfortable for perhaps 3 seconds, and then it is exhilarating in the most quiet, cellular, deeply physical way imaginable. But back to the invisible engineering. In one corner of the maintenance corridor that runs along the exterior of the furnace room, a small door set low in the wall gives access to the underfloor space, the hypocaust cavity itself. If you were to kneel and peer through this door, what you would see would be extraordinary in its ordinariness. A forest of small brick columns receding into darkness, each one perfectly identical, each one bearing its share of the floor's weight with the same patient reliability. The brick is a warm orange-red, fired in the local style to a hardness that resists the constant heat, and each pillar is mortared at top and bottom to a flat tile, a suspensura, that distributes the load evenly across the smaller columns and prevents the floor above from finding any weak point through which to fail. The air in this space is smoky and very warm and carries the smell of old fire, a smell compounded of generations of burned wood and baked clay, and the particular dusty quality of heat that has been circulating in an enclosed space for a very long time. It is not unpleasant. It is, in fact, a deeply archaic smell, one that reaches past the conscious mind to something older, the smell of the hearth, the smell of shelter, the smell of fire as friend rather than threat. The slaves who tend these furnaces work in this heat all day. They carry the wood from storage piles in the service yard. They regulate the fire, judging by feel and experience how much fuel is needed to maintain the desired temperature in each room. They know the building the way a physician knows a body, by its responses to specific interventions, by its habits in various weathers, by the way a cold north wind changes the draw of the furnace and requires adjustments that a warm southerly does not. This knowledge is passed from worker to worker, season to season. It is, its own way, extraordinary as any architectural inscription. It is the knowledge of care, the knowledge of how to keep a thing warm. The spring does not announce itself. For all the grandeur of the temple built above it, for all the columns and carved pediments and painted walls and bronze doors and votive tablets and the smoke of 10,000 offerings rising into the sky, for all of that architecture of reverence, the spring itself is simply water. Water that rises from the earth with a slow and constant pressure, carrying heat it has accumulated over a journey that began as rainwater falling on the Mendip Hills to the south, seeping into the limestone, descending through fissures and fractures in the rock over the course of 10,000 years, heated by the geothermal gradient of the deep earth, until it arrives here, at this particular point in the fabric of the world, hot and mineral-laden and inexhaustible. The temperature of the water as it emerges from the spring is consistent. Year after year, decade after decade, century after century, the spring delivers its water at roughly the same temperature, approximately 45 degrees Celsius, not scalding but deeply, genuinely hot. Hot enough that the steam rising from it is visible even on a warm summer day. Hot enough that in winter, when the cold English air descends and the frost begins to form on the outer courtyard stones before dawn, the spring produces a fog that settles over the entire complex in a low, dense, beautiful cloud, the breath of the earth made visible against the cold. To stand at the edge of the sacred spring itself, in the inner chamber that the Romans built around it, is to be in a space that operates by different rules than the rest of the world. The Romans enclosed the spring in a lead-lined reservoir, carefully constructed to contain the upwelling water and direct its overflow into the great bath, through a system of channels and pipes. The reservoir itself is roughly rectangular, though the spring's natural opening dictates some variation from strict geometry, and its walls are built of the same coursed limestone that appears everywhere in the complex, though here the stone has been darkened to a deep, almost black colour by the mineral-rich water that has washed against it for so many years. The water in the reservoir is not still. It has a movement, not the turbulent movement of a river in flow, but a slow, deep upward movement, a constant, barely perceptible welling that is the spring asserting itself against the weight of the water above. Looking down into the reservoir from the low stone parapet at its edge, you can see this movement in the way certain objects at the bottom of the pool behave. The votive offerings that have been cast into the spring over the years drift and settle and drift again, never entirely still. There are coins down there, hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, their silver and bronze surfaces dulled by the mineral water to a soft, indistinct glimmer. Among the coins are other things, small carved gems, fragments of inscribed metal, a bronze finger, a miniature bronze horse with its legs tucked as if resting, the head of a small clay figurine. These objects were cast into the spring as offerings to Sulis Minerva, each one accompanied by a request or a gratitude or a confession. There is a long tradition in many cultures of sacred springs as places where what cannot be said aloud can be communicated through gesture, where the act of releasing an object into water serves as a kind of prayer that the body can perform when the voice fails. The spring at Bath has received such communications from the people of this region since long before the Romans arrived, and it will continue to receive them for centuries after. There is something in the nature of this particular water, its heat, its constancy, its impossibility in this cold northern landscape, that seems to invite disclosure. The sound inside the spring chamber is unlike any other sound in the complex. The pool in the great bath produces its music at a distance, filtered through walls and corridors and the general acoustic presence of a large occupied building. Here, the spring sound is immediate, the low, continuous voice of the water itself, a sound that is both singular and multifaceted, part rush, part murmur, part something that resists description but falls somewhere in the acoustic range of very deep breathing, the kind of slow, massive breathing that the earth might perform if it breathed. The mineral smell is strongest here. It is a clean smell, paradoxically, clean the way the air after a thunderstorm is clean, electric and present and slightly metallic. The iron in the water gives it a quality that registers first in the nose and then, faintly, in the back of the throat, something that the Romans associated with strength, with vitality, with the chthonic powers of the underworld from which this water has travelled. Drinking the spring water was understood to be medicinal, and perhaps it was. The minerals it carries are real, their effects on the body measurable, but the medicine was never understood as purely chemical. The healing power of the water was inseparable in the Roman mind from the goddess who inhabited it. You could not extract the iron from the divinity any more than you could separate the warmth from the water. Outside the spring chamber, a small office serves the needs of the priests and temple servants responsible for the sacred precinct. Here, a carved stone shelf holds a row of small terracotta containers, each one sealed with a wax stopper, each one filled with spring water that has been collected at specific auspicious times and set aside for ritual use. Table beneath the shelf holds the tools of this trade: bronze styluses, a stack of thin lead sheets, a small lamp, a smooth stone used for pressing inscribed lead into tighter scrolls. This is where the cursed tablets, the defixiones, are prepared, the written petitions to Sulis Minerva that will be cast into the sacred spring. A priest sits at this table now. He is a man of perhaps 50, lean and quiet-featured, wearing a white linen tunic beneath a heavier woolen robe. His hands move with the practiced economy of someone performing a task they have performed many hundreds of times. He is inscribing a lead tablet, the request of some petitioner who gave him the words earlier this morning, perhaps in exchange for a small fee, and whom he is now serving by translating their need into the formal language of petition. His stylus moves through the soft lead in small, precise strokes, and the faint scratching sound it produces is the quietest possible counterpoint to the constant voice of the spring. He does not look up as you stand in the doorway. He is doing the work of the divine. And everything else, including you, including the centuries, including time itself, can wait. The Bath complex does not sleep so much as it dims. Long before the city is properly awake, the furnace fires have been stoked back to life by the morning shift of workers, who arrive in the grey hour before dawn carrying armloads of split oak from the fuel yard, their breath making small clouds in the cold air as they move through the service corridors. The fires had been banked overnight, reduced to a deep bed of coals that kept the hypocaust system from going entirely cold, but now they need to be fed, built back up to full intensity so that by the time the first bathers arrive in the early morning, the floors will be warm and the caldarium air will carry its thick, familiar heat. For most people who use these baths regularly, The visit is not a special occasion, it is part of the morning, as essential as eating, as automatic as breathing. Roman citizen who has the means and the proximity to the baths will stop here, after the morning duties of the household are complete, after the simple breakfast of bread and olive oil and perhaps a handful of olives has been consumed, after any morning clients have been received and dispatched, after the day's first business has been set in motion. To arrive at the baths is to arrive at a particular quality of leisure, but leisure understood not as idleness precisely, but as a form of civic participation. The baths are where the social body of the town performs its daily maintenance, in both the literal and metaphorical sense. Here you wash. Here you also encounter your neighbours, your business associates, your friends, your rivals. Here information travels faster than anywhere else in the city, and the quality of intelligence available at the baths on any given morning will generally exceed what can be gleaned from an hour in the forum. But before any of this social dimension becomes available, there is the private, physical sequence of the bath itself, a ritual as structured, its way, any religious ceremony. You arrive at the entrance carrying your bathing equipment in a small wooden box, a strigil, the curved iron tool used for scraping oil and dirt from the skin, a small flask of olive oil, corked with wax, a linen drying cloth folded carefully across the top, and you are particularly particular about your grooming, a small pair of bronze tweezers and a mirror of polished metal whose reflection is perfectly truthful about some things and mysteriously kind about others. In the apoditarium, the changing room, you find a bench and begin the process of transition from clothed citizen to bather. You remove your sandals first, and the floor of the changing room is warm enough that the absence of their leather is immediately and pleasantly noticeable. Then the cloak, folded with the habit of daily practice. Then the tunic, lifted over the head and folded in turn. There is a moment of exposure, not to the gaze of others particularly. This is a communal space where nakedness is unremarkable, but to the air, to the temperature differential between your skin and the room. Then this exposure lasts only a moment before the ambient warmth of the hypocausted floor and the warm air circulating from the caldarium beyond closes around you like a garment of a different kind. The changing rooms have niches in their walls, narrow alcoves just wide enough to hold a folded bundle of clothing and a wooden box of bathing equipment. Technically, you are leaving your belongings unguarded, and there is a well-established tradition throughout the Roman world of bathhouse theft, a tradition so persistent that several of the curse tablets cast into the sacred spring at Bath address this exact grievance, tasking the goddess to visit misfortune upon whoever helped themselves to someone's cloak or sandals while they were bathing. The more cautious bather will pay a small fee to the capsarius, a slave stationed in the changing room whose function is essentially that of a cloakroom attendant, to keep an eye on things. You decide, today, trust the goddess and the capsarius in equal measure. Into the tepidarium first, as is proper. The warm room receives you with its particular quality of enveloping heat, not aggressive, not insistent, but present in a way that immediately begins the process of relaxation that the bath is designed to produce. You can feel your shoulders descend slightly from their habitual position. You can feel the muscles of your neck, which have been, you now realize, holding a low and persistent tension that you had ceased to notice, begin to relinquish it. This is the gift of the warm room. It asks nothing of you except your presence, and in return it systematically dismantles the muscular armor that daily life requires you to wear. You sit on one of the stone benches that run along the tepidarium wall. The stone is covered with a thin cushion of folded cloth, your own drying cloth, repurposed for this interim, and the warmth rising from the bench beneath meets the warmth of the room around you, so that you are held gently between two warm things. Above you the wall rises to a series of small arched niches, and in each niche a lamp burns with the same quiet, steady presence as the lamps in the outer colonnade. The light in the tepidarium is golden, close, intimate, the light of a room that has decided to be kind. After the tepidarium, the caldarium. The transition between these two rooms is the most significant in the bathing sequence, a step not just in temperature but in intention. The caldarium is not for conversation, it is not for social performance of any kind. It is for the body's specific business of deep warmth and cleansing, and the high heat of the room enforces a kind of concentration on this business that the cooler rooms do not. Here you perform the principal act of Roman bathing, not soap. The Romans did not use soap in their bathing routine. Instead, the sequence is oil, then strigil. You pour a small measure of olive oil from your flask into your palm and spread it across your skin with slow, deliberate strokes, arms, shoulders, torso, and then take the curved iron of the strigil and draw it firmly across the oiled surface, gathering the mixture of oil and sweat and the day's accumulated residue into a grey, soft scraping that falls to the floor in small, unlovely pellets. This is actual cleaning, more effective than it sounds, and accompanied by a sensation in the scraped skin that is extremely pleasant, a warmth of its own, a physical clarity as though the skin has been reminded of itself and responds with a kind of gratitude. After the strigil, the basin. In the caldarium, a large stone basin, the labrum, stands filled with cold water, and it is the custom to pour water over the head from this basin, the cold water providing a sharp, brief contrast to the room's heat and preventing the deep heat of the caldarium from becoming overwhelming. The sound of the water poured from the labrum is one of the characteristic sounds of the caldarium, a brief, bright cascade, intimate and percussive, repeating around the room as each bather performs the same gesture. You tilt your head back. You pour. The cold water meets the heat of the room and the warmth of your skin and produces, for 3 or 4 extraordinary seconds, sensation of absolute clarity, as though every thought you have been carrying has been briefly, gently, placed down. The strigil is a humble instrument. It is a curved piece of iron or bronze, roughly the length of a hand, bent in a shape that suggests the profile of a sleeping bird. The long, slightly flattened handle, the sudden inward curve of the blade. It is not decorated generally, though wealthy bathers sometimes carry strigils of polished bronze with incised handles, small luxuries that announce their owner's means without requiring them to say a word. Most strigils are purely functional, iron, worked smooth, balanced, just adequately for the purpose. They are the tool of the body, the instrument of daily maintenance, and they carry no more social weight than a comb or a pair of sandals, except in the sense that, like all tools used daily, they become intimate objects over time, shaped by use, worn at the grip, familiar in the hand. The olive oil used in the bathing process arrives in small terracotta flasks, stoppered with cork or wax. The oil is not perfumed for the bath, the purpose here is cleansing rather than fragrance, though a bather who wants to emerge from the bath carrying a specific scent might add a few drops of a scented oil to the flask, blending it with the plain olive oil in proportions that are a matter of personal preference and daily mood. The Romans had access to an extraordinary range of scented oils: rose oil from Egypt, spikenard from India, iris root oil from Greece, myrrh from Arabia, and the trade in these luxuries was brisk enough to keep entire merchant fleets employed. But even the plain olive oil, unscented, carries a smell that is deeply satisfying, a warm, slightly nutty green-gold smell that ancient and modern noses alike tend to respond to as fundamentally pleasant, associated at some level with food and warmth and the Mediterranean sun, even in this northern latitude where no olive tree could survive a winter. Applying the oil is not a quick gesture done properly, done in the spirit in which the Romans understood it. It is an act of attention. You pour the oil slowly, and it lands in the centre of your palm, warm from its terracotta flask, which has been sitting on a shelf in the heated room long enough to take on the room's temperature. The oil in your palm spreads across your lifeline, pooling in the slight hollow, and when you press your palms together it becomes distributed across both hands in a film that carries a faint warmth all its own, the warmth of friction, the warmth of living contact. Then the hands move. Across the forearm first, in long strokes that follow the direction of the muscle, from wrist to elbow, the oil leaving a soft, temporary sheen on the skin that catches the lamplight in a brief gleam as you move. The sensation is considerably more complex than the simple physical fact of oil on skin would suggest. It is warm, It creates a slight resistance that keeps your hand from passing over the surface without intention. You feel the skin beneath your palm, feel its texture and temperature and the small landscape of it, the smoothness of the inner arm, the slight roughness of the outer. It asks you, by its very quality, to move slowly and to pay attention. Across the shoulder, where the muscle is thick and the skin less mobile, the oil distributes more slowly, and the stroke here must be shorter and more deliberate. This is frequently where a bathhouse attendant and unctors will take over, if the bather is wealthy enough to retain one or willing to pay for the service. The unctors is not simply an attendant who applies oil. They are trained in a knowledge of the body that is somewhere between massage and physiotherapy, and their understanding of which muscles are holding tension and how to address that tension through pressure and technique is practical and refined. Athletes come to unctors with very specific needs. Soldiers with old injuries come to them. The aged come to them. And ordinary citizens too. Men and women who carry no particular injury but only the normal accumulation of daily tension that the body stores without permission, come to the unctors and emerge from their hands looking, invariably, as though something has been returned to them. After the oil, the strigil. The technique of strigiling has been learned since childhood for most Romans. It is no more exotic a skill than learning to comb hair, and the principles are simple. The blade follows the contours of the body, pressed firmly enough to gather the oil and the layer of skin residue beneath it, but not so firmly as to scrape the skin itself. The angle is everything. Too shallow, and the blade passes over the surface without gathering. Too steep, and it catches on the skin in a way that is uncomfortable. The correct angle comes with practice and eventually becomes automatic, part of the body's vocabulary of self-care. The sound the strigil makes against oiled skin is distinctive, a soft, slightly wet scraping, rhythmic and unhurried, that carries in the caldarium air alongside the sound of water from the labrum and the low murmur of voices from bathers in various stages of their routine. It is a domestic sound entirely ordinary in this context, and yet it has a quality that makes it unexpectedly interesting to listen to something in its rhythm and texture that is, like many sounds of careful physical work, quietly hypnotic. The material gathered by the strigil, the gloios, was understood in the ancient world to have its own value. The oil and sweat scraped from the bodies of athletes was collected and sold apparently as a medicinal substance. The logic here has an internal coherence. If the athletic body has trained virtue and vitality into itself, then even its residue might carry something of that virtue forward. We might smile at this today, or we might recognize in it a pattern of thinking about the body and its products that has never entirely disappeared from human culture. For the ordinary bather, the gloios falls to the floor without ceremony. And a slave with a wooden scraper will clean the caldarium floor periodically throughout the day, maintaining the standard of cleanliness that the management of the baths considers appropriate to their reputation. After the strigil, the body is clean in a way that deserves a more precise word, not just free of dirt in the conventional sense, but opened. The skin feels both lighter and more present simultaneously, more responsive to the air, to temperature changes, to the warmth of the room. The heat that has been building in the body's tissues during the bathing sequence now radiates outward through cleaner skin, and the overall sensation is one of a certain transparency, the feeling of a body that has been for the moment simplified. You set the strigil down on the bench. You let your hands rest on your knees. The caldarium heat presses against your clean skin with a persistence that is almost affectionate. And you breathe. The Roman bath was not, any serious sense of the word, place of silence. This is important to understand because in imagining these spaces across the distance of centuries, there is a temptation to impose upon them the reverential quiet that we associate with museums and libraries. The indoor hush of a space that considers itself important. The Roman bath was nothing of the kind. It was loud, sociable, occasionally raucous, filled from morning to evening with the particular noise of people engaging with each other across the full range of human registers. The low, intense voice of negotiation, the relaxed cadence of old friends, the carrying tone of someone performing for a wider audience than the person directly in front of them, the sudden warmth of genuine laughter, the quieter sound of two people simply sitting together without any need to fill the air. The philosopher Seneca, who lived and wrote during the height of the Roman Empire, once composed a letter in which he described the noise that reached him from the public baths below his apartment, and his account has survived the centuries with remarkable specificity. He wrote of the sound of a man who liked to exercise with weights and grunted rhythmically, of the slap of flesh against flesh, of a ball player who insisted on announcing his own score, of the man whose hair was being plucked. Seneca noted this as a particularly penetrating sound, and of the voices of the drink sellers and the sausage sellers who worked the perimeter of the bathing areas. He mentioned all of this with the mild exasperation of a philosopher trying to work, but also, beneath the exasperation, with the unmistakable quality of a person who has listened carefully to a particular kind of life and found in it something worth recording. Here at Bath, the ambient noise of the great bath hall is shaped by the stone, softer, more diffused than it would be in an open space, bounced and blended by the curved walls and the vaulted ceiling, until individual sounds blur at their edges and merge into a general warm, inhabited quality that is more like the sound of a living thing than of a building. Voices carry, but not perfectly. A conversation 5 paces away is audible as tone and rhythm without its content being clearly legible, which creates a quality of privacy within community that is perhaps exactly what these spaces were designed to provide. Along the wide stone ledge that runs beside the great bath, small groups have naturally formed. This is the bath's primary social space, the place where the bathing sequence has been completed or paused or used as a pretext for something more important, and where the hours can be spent in the most Roman of activities, talking. A group of 3 men in their middle years have arranged themselves at comfortable intervals along the ledge, their feet in the water, the steam circling around them with slow indifference. One of them, broad-shouldered with the kind of deeply comfortable posture that comes from having no uncertainty about one's place in the world, is currently in the middle of a long opinion about the price of grain. His companions receive this opinion with the practiced patience of people who have been receiving this man's opinions for many years. One of them is nodding slowly, with the expression of someone whose nod means something more complex than agreement. The other is watching the surface of the water in a way that might indicate deep thought or absolute vacancy. It is impossible to tell, and the ambiguity is itself a kind of social skill. At the far end of the pool, a young man sits alone. He is perhaps 18, his hair dark and newly cut. You can see the pale strip of skin at the back of his neck where the barber's blade has worked most recently, and his expression is the expression of someone trying to appear at ease in a public space while being, in fact, intensely aware of every element of his surroundings. He is learning to be here, you understand, learning the particular comfort of this space, the social codes that govern it, the way that time works differently at the bath's edge than it does in the rest of the world. He will learn these things. Few more years, a few hundred more afternoons on this ledge, and the ease will be real rather than performed. Between these groups, tanned threading through the general social landscape of the pool's edge, various conversations are in progress that illustrate the extraordinary range of subjects that Roman bathing culture contained. 2 women, wealthy by the quality of their jewellery, which they have not removed and are not required to remove in the women's section of the complex, are discussing with considerable animation a marriage arrangement that concerns someone known to both of them. The quality of their interest in this subject is intense, their voices slightly lowered, not from lack of confidence but from the understanding that some subjects carry better in a lower register. They punctuate their conversation with small, precise gestures, a finger raised, a slight tilt of the head that communicate volumes without requiring words. An older man, seated slightly apart from everyone else, is reading. The scroll in his lap is not an easy object to manage in the humid air of the bath hall. The papyrus softens and becomes slightly limp, the ink potentially at risk, but he has clearly managed this before and has positioned himself in a particular spot where a small draught from a ventilation gap in the wall keeps the air slightly drier. He reads in the way of someone who reads for necessity rather than pleasure, moving his lips very slightly, his finger travelling beneath the lines of text to keep his place. What he is reading you cannot determine from where you stand. but the quality of his attention is complete, the bath's social noise having been successfully tuned out by the singular concentration of a man with a document to understand. None of this would be remarkable to anyone present. This is simply a Tuesday, simply the midday hours at the baths, the social texture of ordinary life in this particular corner of the Roman Empire, playing out with the unremarkable naturalness of things that happen every day in the same place in the same way for generations. And this is perhaps the thing that reaches you most deeply, not the grandeur of the architecture, not the philosophical weight of the sacred spring, not the engineering marvel of the hypocaust, but this, the simple fact that people gathered here and sat at the edge of warm water, tanned, talked about grain prices and marriages and whatever else was on their minds, and that this simple gathering of people at warm water is the oldest human activity of all, older than Rome, older than any god or civilization, the gathering of living creatures at a source of warmth. You settle yourself on the ledge. Your feet enter the water. The warmth rises to your ankles, your shins. Someone nearby says something that makes their companion laugh, a genuine laugh, brief and warm, over in a moment, and the sound of it rises into the steam and disperses into the general conversation of the hall like one more note in a long, unhurried piece of music. There is a corridor that branches away from the main bathing hall, narrower than the principal passages, its floor laid with a mosaic of smaller tesserae in a pattern of interlocking circles and vine leaves in muted green and cream. The lamplight here is slightly different. The lamps are spaced a little closer together, compensating for the narrower dimensions, and the warmth that rises from the floor feels perhaps a degree or two more insistent than in the main hall, though the hypocaust beneath this section has been calibrated with a slightly different specification in mind, or as though the closeness of the walls simply retains the heat more efficiently. This corridor leads to the women's section of the complex. Roman bath facilities accommodated women in different ways across different sites and different periods. Some complexes maintained entirely separate facilities, mirror images of the men's baths operating simultaneously. Others used the same facilities at different hours, with women typically given the morning hours and men the afternoon and evening. The arrangement here is its own blend of these approaches, a set of rooms specifically designated for female use, connected to the main complex by this corridor but maintaining a certain residential quality, a certain inwardness, that distinguishes it in atmosphere from the more public spaces of the main hall. The apoditarium of the women's section is smaller and furnished with slightly more attention to comfort than its counterpart in the main hall. The stone benches here are covered with cushions, proper cushions, stuffed with wool and covered with plain linen that has been washed recently enough to carry the scent of the soap and water used to clean it. The niches in the walls for clothing and personal effects are more numerous and more carefully sized, as though whoever designed this space had thought more specifically about its users' needs. On one of these benches, a woman is being attended by her ornatrix, her personal maid, skilled in the arts of grooming, whose presence in the bath complex is entirely normal. The maid is working on her mistress's hair, a complex process that involves several stages of oiling, combing and arrangement, and which is taking place with the unhurried efficiency of a routine performed many hundreds of times. The mistress sits with the particular composure of someone accustomed to being attended, not stiff or haughty, but settled, her body arranged for this specific purpose, the mind apparently elsewhere in a way that suggests she has learned to use the time her grooming requires for her own quiet thinking. The ornatrix herself is a young woman of perhaps 20, her own hair simply dressed, practically, necessarily, since elaborate hairdressing would be incompatible with her work, and her hands have a sureness in them that is deeply satisfying to observe. She works the wide-toothed comb through her mistress's hair with a patience that seems genuine rather than merely professional, and the sound of the comb moving through well-oiled, slightly damp hair is one of the quietest and most intimate sounds in the entire bath complex, a soft, rhythmic pull and release that carries barely a foot in the still air of the changing room. In the tepidarium of the women's section, 3 women recline on stone couches that have been padded with wool-stuffed mattresses, The couches are arranged so that their occupants can see one another without effort, a social configuration that is clearly familiar and comfortable to all three. They are talking, but in a way that is markedly different from the conversation at the men's pool, less performative, more direct, with longer pauses between contributions that carry no awkwardness, the pauses of people who have no need to fill silence for the sake of filling it. One of the three is older than her companions, perhaps 60, with the kind of face that has organized itself around a lifetime of observation and quiet intelligence. She is listening to the other two with the expression of someone who has heard variations of this conversation before and finds it instructive rather than tedious. Occasionally she makes a brief, precise remark that shifts the conversation's direction in a way that is clearly intentional, and her companions receive these redirections with a combination of amusement and respect that indicates a long-established relationship. The second is a woman of perhaps 35, somewhere in the middle of her life by the Roman reckoning, and she carries herself with the particular ease of someone who has recently resolved something difficult. There is a lightness about her that is not superficial, it goes all the way down, the lightness of a person who has put down a weight they had been carrying for a long time and whose body has not yet entirely adjusted to the absence of it. The third is young, early 20s perhaps, and she is absorbing the conversation of her elders with the quality of attention that distinguishes the genuinely curious from the merely polite. She is not simply waiting for her turn to speak, she is listening in a way that changes the shape of her face slightly, a particular quality of directed openness that is a sign, always, of someone genuinely engaged with the world around them. What they are discussing you cannot hear from the archway where you pause for a moment. The women's section offers an implicit privacy to its occupants that even a passing stranger respects instinctively, but the quality of their conversation is readable without its content. This is the kind of talk that matters, the kind that is remembered afterward, the kind that does something to the people in it. On the wall of the tepidarium, someone, in a moment of private inspiration, probably years or decades ago, has scratched a small line of text into the painted plaster with a stylus or nail. The scratched Latin is not as neat as official inscriptions, but its intent is clear. Balneum hic lavat corpus et animam, the bath washes here both body and soul. It is not an original thought. It is the kind of thing that many people have expressed in many forms across many centuries. But there is something about finding it here, scratched in haste or in a moment of private conviction into the warm plaster of this particular wall, that makes it feel less like a quotation and more like a discovery, as though someone came to the bath one afternoon and understood something for the first time and could not leave without marking the understanding. The older woman sees you looking at the inscription. She says nothing. She simply follows your gaze, reads the words, and returns to her companions with the faint expression of someone who has found something confirmed rather than revealed. The comb moves through the hair. The lamps burn in their niches. The warmth rises through the floor. Hunger, turns out, does not respect the sacred. By midday, the bath complex has been operating for several hours, and the combination of heat, physical exertion, even the relatively gentle exertion of bathing, and the general metabolic demand of a warm environment means that the people moving through these spaces have begun consistently to develop an appetite. The Roman bath management understood this perfectly. The provision of food and drink within and immediately adjacent to the bath complex was not an afterthought. It was a considered and profitable element of the experience, as integral to the design of the place as the hypocaust system or the spring channel. Along the exterior wall of the complex facing the main street, a row of small commercial units, shops and snack bars, serve the bath's visitors. These are the thermopolia, the equivalent of fast food counters. Their front walls built to contain deep terracotta jars set flush with the counter's surface, filled with hot food kept warm by the proximity of their own small charcoal fires below. At this hour, the counters are busy, the midday crowd moving through them with the purposeful efficiency of people who want food quickly and have clear ideas about what they want. The menu is not elaborate. It does not need to be. Bread, fresh and still slightly warm from the bakery 2 streets away, its crust giving with a faint crackling resistance and its interior soft and white and carrying the yeasty, wheaten smell that is one of the most fundamentally satisfying smells the human nose encounters. Lentil porridge, thick, well seasoned with cumin and a splash of garum, the fermented fish sauce that Roman cooking treats as roughly equivalent in function to salt, umami, and everything else you might want to add to a dish simultaneously. Hard-boiled eggs, their shells already removed, glistening slightly in the light, their yolks firm and bright yellow olives from a wide, shallow bowl, green wrinkled, preserved in brine with a spring of thyme and a few dried chili fragments that give the brine a faint warmth. Drinks, water naturally from the public fountain at the corner, clean, cold, run from the same aqueduct system that serves the bath. Wine, cut with water in the Roman custom, the ratio a matter of preference and time of day, more water at midday, less in the evening. The wine here is a local import, not the finest available in the empire, but honest and serviceable, a rough red that tastes of the clay amphora it travelled in, and carries a slight earthiness that is not unpleasant once you're accustomed to it. Inside the complex, near the entrance of the apoditarium, a small refreshment station occupies an alcove. A slave manages this station from early morning to closing, and his position gives him an extraordinary vantage point on the social life of the bath. Everyone passes through here, and a slave who is good at his work will have learned over months and years more about the habits and preferences of the town's regular bathers than any intelligence service could accumulate. He knows who takes their wine neat and who always asks for water. He knows whose appetite increases after exercise and whose decreases after the caldarium. He knows who is generous with tips and who always finds a reason to defer the payment to the next visit. The food he offers at this station is lighter than what the street counters provide. Small items suitable for eating while standing or moving between stages of the bathing sequence. Pine nuts roasted and salted, sold in a small folded cone of papyrus. Dried figs, their skins dark and leathery, their interiors still faintly sticky with natural sugar, small honey cakes baked in the morning and wrapped in vine leaves that have kept them moist through the hours since. These are the flavours of the bath's interval, the small consolations of the pause between hot room and cold plunge. There are also goods that are not food. A vendor who has established himself near the entrance to the great bath hall sells small clay oil flasks to bathers who arrive without their own, and strigils, plain iron ones, for those who have forgotten theirs. These are rental goods as much as sales goods, and there is an understood arrangement by which an item can be purchased at a price that reflects the probability of its being returned, and a slightly different price for an outright purchase. The vendor is matter-of-fact about this arrangement, in a way that suggests it has never caused him trouble. He sells, from the same tray, small votive offerings for the temple, clay figurines of the goddess in various sizes, each one pressed from the same mould and therefore identical but subtly differentiated in finish, some painted, some plain, some with an incised inscription around the base. These sell well. The sacred spring is just around the corner, and the desire to leave something behind to mark one's presence in a place that has provided comfort is perennial. A philosopher, at least a man who presents himself as a philosopher, his robe a studied plainness, his manner expressing access to truths not available to everyone, has taken a position near the pool's edge where the regular foot traffic ensures him an audience. He is holding forth to a small shifting group of listeners on a topic that is broadly the relationship between bodily health and philosophical virtue. His delivery is confident, his vocabulary impressive, his argument somewhat less clear than his delivery would suggest. The group of listeners is responding with a particular quality of attention that is not quite belief, but is willing to be convinced, the expression of people who have come to be warmed and cleansed and are amenable, in this state of openness, to the possibility of being instructed. Small boy of perhaps 10 is selling water. He carries a clay jug of fresh, cold water from the fountain and a single bronze cup, and he moves through the colonnade with the quick, sure-footed confidence of a child who has been navigating this particular territory for long enough to know every shortcut and obstacle. He charges 1 coin per cup, and his pricing is, in the context of the bath's economy, competitive. He is doing brisk business. None of this commerce is crass. None of it feels incongruous with the sacred civic dignity of the space. The Romans had no equivalent of our modern discomfort with the proximity of commerce and spirituality, no sense that buying and selling ought not to happen in the shadow of a temple, trade and devotion, appetite and contemplation, the body and the divine. These things exist on the same continuum in the Roman mind, and the bath complex which serves all of them simultaneously is simply the most honest expression of that understanding. You buy a small cone of pine nuts from the vendor. They are warm. They are salty. They are perfect. Not everyone who comes to Aquae Sulis comes for an afternoon's leisure. Some come for the water in a more specific sense, for the minerals it carries, for the heat it delivers to tissues that have been failing in some way, for the relief that the constant warmth of the spring pools provides to joints that have grown stiff and painful, skin conditions that the damp English climate has aggravated, to 100 ailments that the ancient world understood through frameworks entirely different from our own, but addressed in practice with an empirical attention to results that transcends the theoretical differences. The reputation of the baths at Bath at Aquae Sulis as a place of healing extends beyond the local. People travel here from other parts of Britain, from Gaul across the water, occasionally from farther still, because word has spread that the waters here do something for the body that other waters do not. Whether this reputation is entirely the product of the mineral content of the spring, or partly the product of the psychological effect of travelling to a famous healing site, or partly the goddess herself, these are not questions that the Romans feel any compulsion to disentangle. The cure is the cure, the means by which it operates is the goddess's business, not the patient's. Modest colonnaded building to the east of the main baths complex serves as something between a consulting room and an infirmary, a place where physicians attached to the temple and the baths see patients, assess their conditions, and prescribe courses of treatment that almost invariably involve specific protocols of bathing in the sacred waters. Roman medicine is sophisticated in ways that its critics sometimes underestimate. The physicians who work here are trained in traditions that include Hippocratic medicine, filtered through centuries of Roman practice and augmented by local herbal and empirical knowledge, accumulated over generations of treating the specific complaints that the climate of Britain produces. One physician, a man of perhaps 45 named in the records as Gaius, is currently conducting a consultation in one of the smaller rooms of this building. His patient, a man in his 60s, well-dressed, who has travelled from a town several days' journey away, presents with the joint inflammation that the Romans called podagra, what we might recognise as gout, affecting primarily the feet and lower legs. The physician examines the affected areas with hands that combine the gentleness of long practice with the concentration of genuine diagnostic attention. He notes the swelling, the heat, excessive heat, even against the baseline warmth of the bath environment, the characteristic redness. His prescription will involve restriction of certain foods and wines known to aggravate the condition, daily immersion of the affected limbs in the spring waters for a period of not less than 1 hour in the morning and 1 hour in the late afternoon, specific herbal preparation to be consumed before the morning bathing, and a votive offering to Sulis Minerva, without which the other prescriptions would be incomplete. This last element of the prescription is not merely conventional. The physician believes, as most of his contemporaries believe, that the body and the divine are not separate systems that occasionally interact. They are aspects of the same system. Physical illness is never only physical. It always has a dimension that medicine alone cannot address, and the attention of the goddess, solicited through the proper forms of prayer and offering, is not supplementary to the healing, but integral to it. A patient who bathes without also praying is like a patient who takes half a remedy. The partial treatment may produce partial results, but the full healing requires the full attention. Down the corridor from Gaius's consulting room, a second physician, younger, her name unknown to the records, but her presence attested by material evidence. Women practicing medicine in the Roman world, being less unusual than later centuries might suggest, is attending to a different kind of patient. This woman came to Aquae Sulis 3 weeks ago from a coastal town, suffering from a persistent eye inflammation that had resisted treatment at home. The physician has prescribed a regimen involving the sacred spring water applied to the eyes in specific dilutions, combined with a preparation made from plants gathered from the surrounding hillsides. And the results, she notes in her mental record, have been encouraging. The inflammation is retreating slowly and consistently in the way that healing proceeds when it is genuine rather than temporary. The patient herself is a woman of perhaps 50, pragmatic and direct, who has come to this consultation with the attitude of someone who has already decided to trust the process and needs only to be told whether the process is proceeding correctly. She asks the physician specific questions about the clarity of her vision, about whether the occasional burning sensation she still experiences in the mornings is a sign of improvement or deterioration, about how much longer the treatment will require. She receives specific answers delivered without excessive qualification, and she receives them as a person accustomed to dealing with information directly. Near the entrance to the healing complex, a series of carved stone relief panels record specific instances of healing attributed to the goddess. These votives were commissioned by grateful patients or by their families in cases where the patient was unable to commission them personally. The inscriptions are formulaic, but the details they contain are specific. This man was cured of a leg wound. This woman recovered from a fever that had lasted many months. This soldier, discharged from service with an injury to his arm, regained the full use of the limb after 3 months of bathing at Aquae Sulis. Among the votive panels, one is more recent than the others, the carving still relatively sharp, the surface of the stone still carrying a faint whiteness that the older panels have long since lost. It shows a pair of hands held upward and open in the universal gesture of offering. Below the hands, an inscription, the donor's name, their illness, the duration of their treatment, and the simple concluding phrase, salus per aquam, health through water. The dedication is not eloquent, it does not attempt to be. It is the record of a person for whom something worked and who wanted to mark the fact of that working in stone in a place where others would see it, so that others who came here with their own conditions, their own fears, their own need for comfort and healing and the possibility of restoration, might see what had been possible and carry that possibility with them into the water. The water continues to rise. The water continues to heal. As the afternoon moves toward its ending, the quality of the light inside the bath complex undergoes a transformation so gradual that no single moment can be identified as its turning point. Only, at some time between the full brightness of mid-afternoon and the first deepening of the evening sky visible through the clerestory windows, the light has become something different. Warmer in its colour, lower in its angle, it now enters the great bath hall at a trajectory that creates long shadows behind every pillar and makes the surface of the water appear to be composed of slow-moving copper and gold, rather than the green-grey mineral mixture of earlier in the day. The crowd, too, has shifted. The midday bathers, the practical ones, who came for the social round and the physical maintenance and the business conversation, have largely departed, returning to their afternoon obligations. What remains is a different population, the leisured, the devout, the elderly, and the ones for whom the bath is less a routine and more a ritual. As the last of the daytime visitors move toward the exits, certain members of the temple staff begin their own preparations for the rites of the evening. This is not a public event precisely. It is not a spectacle for which visitors take seats in an allocated space, but it is not entirely private either. Those who remain in the complex as the evening begins to descend will witness something of the ceremonies that mark the transition from day into night at this particular sacred site, and they are permitted to witness it because the ceremony benefits from being witnessed, because the gods are served in part by being seen to be served. A priest of Sulis Minerva, senior, identifiable by the band of iron red at the hem of his white robe, emerges from the inner precincts of the temple as the sun begins to lower toward the hills to the west. He carries in both hands a shallow bronze bowl wide as a dinner plate filled with water drawn from the sacred spring. The water in the bowl is still from the mineral spring, and it catches the evening light in a way that makes the bowl seem to be carrying not water but the sky's reflection, amber and rose, and at the very centre a deep, complicated blue that is the colour of the sky directly overhead. He moves slowly, with the particular measured pace of ritual movement, not the pace of a man crossing a courtyard, but the pace of a man performing an act of deliberate meaning, each footfall placed with consciousness, each breath part of a pattern. He descends the steps of the temple podium and crosses the precinct toward the sacred spring chamber. Those who are present stop what they are doing not because they have been instructed to, but because the quality of his movement creates a gravitational field of attention around it. You simply look automatically as you look at anything moving with that quality of intentionality. At the threshold of the spring chamber, he pauses. He speaks several lines in Latin, formal, measured, in the cadence of a text that has been memorized and repeated many hundreds of times, but that, in his delivery, retains a quality of genuine address rather than recitation. He is not performing these words, he is saying them in the full sense. He is directing them toward a recipient he believes is present. He pours a portion of the spring water back into the spring. Not all of it, a carefully judged portion. Then he carries the remaining water back to the temple, where it will be used in the rites that will take place inside throughout the evening. This ceremony, the evening return of the spring water to itself, is one of many small specific rites that structure the sacred day at Aquae Sulis. Some of these rites are known to the wider population, and some are known only to the temple staff and the initiated. What is universal is the understanding that the spring does not take care of itself, that it requires, like all sacred things, the ongoing attention of those charged with its care. The spring rises from the earth constantly, without human intervention, producing its hot mineral water through processes that no Roman quite understands, and no Roman feels any particular pressure to understand. But the sacred dimension of the spring, the goddess who inhabits it, the covenant between the divine and the human community that the spring represents, requires maintenance, requires ceremony, requires someone to carry the bowl across the precinct at the end of each day and pour the water back with intention. Later in the evening, as the lamps are being lit throughout the complex, a second rite takes place that is more elaborate, the lighting of the sacred flame. At the center of the temple in the innermost chamber, accessible only to the priesthood, a flame has been kept burning continuously for many years. This is not unusual in Roman religious life. The concept of the eternal flame, the fire that must not be allowed to go out, appears in many of the empire's sacred traditions, most famously in the Temple of Vesta in Rome. Here the flame burns in honor of Sulis Minerva, and its maintenance is considered among the most essential of the temple's obligations. The wood for this fire is specific, particular species selected for their qualities both practical and symbolic, and it is fed throughout the day and night by the junior members of the temple staff on a rotation that ensures it is never unattended. In the evening, when the fresh fuel is laid for the night's burning, a small ceremony accompanies the laying, a brief prayer, a drop of olive oil added to the fire, a moment of stillness before the next task begins. Visiting woman wrapped in a woolen cloak against the evening chill that has begun to infiltrate the outer precincts, stands near the temple entrance and watches the lamplight growing steadily across the precinct as the sky darkens. She has been here 2 days, come from a town to the north where the winter has settled early and the cold has aggravated a condition she carries in her chest, a tightness, a difficulty that the warm air of the bath complex has already begun to address. She will stay another week, she thinks, perhaps longer. She is watching the precinct lamps coming alive one by one, and her expression is that of someone who has arrived somewhere they did not know they were looking for. The torchlight on the column surfaces, the smell of the evening incense from the altar, the sound of the spring beneath everything like a heartbeat, all of it is reaching her. She stands a little straighter. She breathes. The evening settles around the precinct like a cloak being drawn gently around the shoulders. And the lamps continue, tone by one, find their light. There is a theory, not a scientific theory, exactly, but a theory of the kind that arises in the mind when a person spends a long, still afternoon somewhere very old that stone remembers. Not in the way that a written record remembers with fixed and retrievable information stored in specific order. Rather, stone remembers the way the body remembers, in its texture, its temperature, its particular resistance under the hand. The limestone of these walls has absorbed 40-degree water for 200 years. 200 years of steam drifting against its surface, of the mineral-laden air of the spring room condensing on its face in fine droplets, of the warmth of the hypocaust rising through the structure and pressing against the stone from the inside. This has done something to the stone. Not dramatically, it has not carved it into new shapes or changed its fundamental chemical nature, but it has given it a quality that newly quarried limestone does not possess. A quality that is almost living, almost bodily, though the stone has arrived at some arrangement with the warmth it has conducted and the water it has absorbed and emerged from that long negotiation with a richer character. When you press your hand flat against the wall of the caldarium, which you do now, gently placing your palm just above the height of your shoulder against the painted plaster that covers the box-tile heating system underneath, the warmth that meets you is immediate and deep, and it holds your hand rather than simply touching it. It has a presence. This is what stone remembers. The Romans who built these walls and laid these floors could not have articulated this precisely, but they understood it intuitively in the way that all people who work with physical materials and occupy physical spaces come to understand things that the vocabulary of their culture does not always provide words for. They knew that a well-built building acquires, over time, a quality that a new building does not have. They valued antiquity not purely for its historical associations, but for this experiential quality. This sense that a place which has been inhabited and cared for becomes more itself over time rather than less. The philosopher Marcus Aurelius, writing in his private journals in the 2nd century, noted that everything material is in continuous flux, that the atoms of the body he inhabited had cycled through other forms and would cycle through other forms again, and that what seemed permanent was only apparently so. He found this thought not distressing but liberating. It removed the obligation to grasp at permanence, which is in any case impossible, and replaced it with the simpler and more achievable aspiration of presence, of being fully where one is, in the particular configuration of matter and consciousness that constitutes oneself at this specific moment. In a bath complex, this philosophy is not abstract. It is the immediate experience. You're here in this specific configuration of yourself, your particular body, your particular fatigue or energy, your particular mood and history, and the specific set of small concerns that occupied your mind before you entered the bath, and that have, in the past hour, receded to a comfortable distance. The stone around you has been here in its configuration for much longer. It has held the warmth of other bodies, all the bodies that have leaned against it, sat beside it, pressed their hands against its surface in the same gesture you're making now across 2 centuries of afternoons. It does not know their names, it does not distinguish them from each other. It holds them all equally, without preference, without memory in the discrete sense, but with a kind of accumulated hospitality that is perhaps the purest form of welcome, the welcome of a place that has learned through long practice to receive whoever comes. What strikes you, pressing your hand against this wall in this particular afternoon light, is the continuity of the gesture. The person who stood here 50 years ago and did the same thing, pressed their hand against the warm stone, felt the warmth rise into their palm, and stood for a moment in the particular still attention that warmth invites, was a person whose name you will never know, whose face you will never see, whose specific worries and hopes and the particular tenor of their Tuesday afternoon are entirely inaccessible to you. And yet the gesture was the same, the warmth was the same, the stillness was the same. This is what the bath offers that is distinct from what philosophy offers and what medicine offers and what social connection offers, though it offers something of all three. It offers the experience of participating in something that is larger than the individual and longer than the individual lifetime, not through abstraction but through the body, through the physical fact of standing in a place that has been stood in before, pressing your hand against stone that has been pressed against before, floating in water that has been floated in before, and receiving from all of this not a lesson but a sensation. The sensation of being part of a continuity that does not require you to do anything particular to participate in it. You are simply here, and your presence is sufficient, and the place has been receiving presences like yours for long enough that your arrival is entirely unremarkable and entirely welcome. There is a word in Latin, pietas, that is often translated as piety, but carries a weight of meaning that the English word does not fully contain. It means something closer to the proper fulfillment of one's obligations, to the gods, to one's family, to one's community, to the specific place and time in which one has been set. It is not an abstract virtue. It is entirely concrete. It manifests in specific gestures, specific offerings, specific attentions paid to specific things. The evening ceremony of the priest returning the spring water to the spring is pietas. The craftsman who takes care to lay the mosaic tesserae level and true, even in a section of floor that will be covered by a bench and never seen, is practicing pietas. The old woman who tends the lamps in the colonnade with care, even when she has tended them for so many years that the tending is purely habitual, she is practicing pietas. And you, pressing your hand against this warm wall and pausing for a moment in the middle of an ordinary afternoon to be genuinely present to where you are practicing something in that direction. Not because it is required of you, but because something in the nature of this place, this stone, this warmth, this 2,000-year-old arrangement of mineral and water and fire and human attention, something in all of this asks for your attention in return, and it would be a small kind of loss to decline the invitation. You stand at the wall a moment longer. The warmth continues. Time at the bath moves differently than time outside it. This is not merely a subjective impression, or rather it is an entirely subjective impression, but subjective impressions are not for that reason false. The body is the most honest instrument of measurement we have access to, and the body's report on time spent in the baths is consistent across all the reports that have been left to us. An hour in the hot room feels like half an hour, a morning at the bath's edge feels like a drowsy, amber-tinted afternoon. The hours between entry and departure compress, in a way that is not the compression of boredom or distraction, but of something more like absorption, the feeling of time that has been so thoroughly inhabited that it leaves no empty space in which to be measured. The Stoic philosophers had a useful framework for thinking about time. There is chronos, sequential time, the time of clocks and calendars, of hours and minutes and the forward march of days, and there is kairos, the time of the appropriate moment, the time that is measured not in duration but in quality, the time of the opportune, the time of the fully present. The bath operates almost entirely in kairos. When you're in the caldarium, the question of how long you have been there is both answerable and irrelevant. You're there for as long as the warmth requires you to be there, as long as the conversation sustains itself, as long as the body's need for heat is met and exceeded and met again in the circular, pleasurable way that excess warmth operates when the air is full of steam and the stone floor is radiating from below. The sacred spring contributes to this temporal displacement in its own way. The spring is ancient, not in the way that a well-preserved building is ancient, retaining its original form as the years accumulate around it, but in the deeper sense of being continuous. The spring that rises here today is the same spring that rose here 1,000 years before the Romans arrived. The water table that feeds it is connected to rainfall that fell on the Mendip Hills generations ago, and the water flowing now through the lead-line channel into the Great Bath has been underground for 10,000 years, acquiring its heat and its mineral character in the slow, deep time of geological process. To stand at the edge of the spring and look down into its upwelling is to look at something that does not belong to any particular century. The spring is older than Rome, it will be flowing long after Rome is only a name. There is a word that arises in such moments of geological perspective, a word that is itself old enough to carry some of the weight it describes, and the word is humility. Not the self-flagellating variety, not the performed modesty of the socially anxious, but the genuine quieting of the ego that occurs when the scale of something genuinely large is perceived directly rather than abstractly. The spring does not make you feel small in a diminishing way. It makes you feel appropriately sized, reminds you gently of the actual proportions of things, and in so doing provides a relief that is related to but distinct from the relief of a warm bath. The water in the Great Bath is the medium through which all of this becomes physical rather than merely theoretical. You step into the pool and the water receives you not as it might receive a stone sinking below the surface to displace a volume of liquid, but as it receives all living things. It gives way, it adjusts, it accommodates your shape with a slow, continuous, immensely patient readjustment of its molecules. You are part of the pool now for the duration of your immersion. Your body's heat adds to the pool's heat, infinitesimally. Your presence creates ripples that travel outward to the pool's edges and return, and these returning ripples interfere with new ripples in a pattern of extraordinary complexity that the eye cannot follow, only appreciate in its general quality of aliveness. The surface of the pool when you are still in it is the most honest mirror you will encounter all day. It does not idealize, but it also does not criticize. It shows you your own face as a pattern of light and shadow distributed across the living surface of moving water, your features perpetually shifting, never fixed, a continuous series of approximations of yourself rather than a single definitive image. This is in its way the most accurate self-portrait possible, not you as you are in any given instant, but you as you are in motion, in time, perpetually becoming rather than fixed in being. The sound of the water is the sound of continuity. From far back in the building, from the spring room, through the channels, through the receiving pool, all the way to where you float now in the Great Bath. The water has been in motion since before your grandparents were born, since before the foundations of this complex were laid, since before the first Roman surveyor set his instruments on this particular point in the green English landscape, and concluded that here, where the hot water rises, where the Celts had always gathered, where the goddess was already present, here was where something should be built. The building was built. The water kept flowing. And here you are now in the warm afternoon water, your body a temporary arrangement of matter that the universe has organized into a consciousness capable of appreciating all of this. The stone, the lamplight, the mineral smell, the steam drifting in slow columns through the bars of late sunlight, and the appreciation itself is the thing, the entire thing, not a means to any further end, but the irreducible experience of a living creature in a living world paying attention. The water holds you. You let it. Time moves in the slow, warm way of things that are not in a hurry. And the afternoon continues, unhurried, toward its own natural close. There is a particular kind of human desire that the sacred spring of Aquae Sulis has been receiving for many centuries. And it is the desire to be known. Not famous, not celebrated, not recorded in any official capacity in the annals or the census or the marble inscriptions of public works. Something more elemental and more private than any of those public forms of recognition. Simply the desire that some consciousness, some presence, some force that might be called a god if that is the category available, and a spirit if not, and simply the universe if one prefers, that some attentive presence knows that you were here. That the particular shape of your joy or your grief or your need left some mark, however small, on the fabric of things. The curse tablets of Aquae Sulis, the Defixiones, are the most direct expression of this desire that the archaeological record has preserved. Several hundred of them have been recovered from the spring's waters, their lead surfaces incised with prayers and petitions and demands, their languages ranging from formal literary Latin to the rough phonetic writing of someone who knew the letters but not the classical forms, their concerns ranging from the grand to the almost endearingly specific. Someone wants justice for a stolen sum of money. Someone wants their stolen cloak returned. Someone wants a former friend named, specifically named, with evident precision to suffer consequences appropriate to their betrayal. Someone wants a sick child to recover. Someone, as you read earlier, wants only to be known by name. What these tablets represent, taken together, is something extraordinary. A direct communication between ordinary people and the divine, unmediated by the official priesthood, personal in the extreme, and preserved by the chemistry of lead and the mineral-rich, tanaerobic conditions of the spring waters for 2,000 years. The priests who wrote the tablets for petitioners who could not write their own. Men like the quiet figure you observed earlier at the stone table with his stylus were performing a literacy service. But the impulse behind each tablet was entirely the petitioner's own. The desire was genuinely felt, the petition was genuinely meant, and they were cast into the spring with genuine hope. This is what strikes you most deeply about these small, corroded, clumsily inscribed pieces of metal that the earth has kept for 2 millennia. Not their content exactly, but their faith. The person who inscribed a petition for a stolen cloak and cast it into this water did not do so ironically. They did not do so as a cultural performance or a social convention attended to out of habit, but not genuinely believed. They did it because they believed it worked, because they had heard of others whose petitions were answered, because the spring was visibly sacred. The evidence was right there, in the hot water rising impossibly from the cold English ground, the steam and the mineral smell and the goddess's face carved in the pediment stone, and a world that contains such obvious evidences of the divine is a world in which divine attention to human need is not merely possible but expected. We have lost something in losing that expectation. Not the specific belief necessarily, not the specific goddess or the specific theological framework, but the quality of expectation itself, the sense that the universe is the kind of place that notices that the particular texture of one's life matters to something beyond one's immediate circle, that a petition cast into water reaches something that can receive it. The great inscriptions of Aquae Sulis, the official ones, the marble dedications of altars and buildings and military achievements, will be read by historians, and they will tell a certain story, the story of power and organization and imperial ambition, and the useful civic religion of the Roman state. But the cursed tablets will tell a different story, the story underneath the official one, the story of specific people with specific griefs and specific hopes making contact with what they believed was available to receive them. Both stories are true. Both are necessary to understand what this place was. The stone of the temple walls carries the first story. The water of the sacred spring carries the second. And in the combination of these two, the permanent and the flowing, the carved and the dissolved, the monument and the whisper, you find something that resembles the complete picture of a human community, its official face and its private face, its civic dignity and its personal need. The story it tells about itself and the story it tells only to the water. The afternoon light has continued its slow movement toward the west, and the bars of sunlight through the clerestory windows are now nearly horizontal, striking the far wall of the great bath hall at a near-level angle that illuminates the carved cornices and pilaster capitals in extraordinary clarity. Every acanthus leaf in sharp shadow and highlight, every turn of carved stone finding its fullest definition in this low, warm light. The water in the great bath has taken on the specific amber of late afternoon, and the steam rising from it catches the light in ways that seem intentional, choreographed, though the entire physics of hot water and cool air and oblique sunlight has been arranged specifically to produce this particular effect at this particular hour. There is in this arrangement something that feels like the landscape expressing its own beauty, not for an audience, but simply because this is what it does, what the light and water and stone do when they are left together long enough and the conditions are right. The bath complex does not perform its beauty. It simply has it as a natural consequence of being what it is, a place where the right materials were assembled with the right intention and have been maintained with the right kind of care across a sufficient span of time for something extraordinary and entirely unself-conscious to develop. You have nothing to do but receive it. So you do. The transition from afternoon to evening in the bath complex happens not in the sky. The sky is not directly visible from inside the main hall, but in the quality of the light and in the quality of the sound, and in a certain gradual change in the atmosphere that is atmospheric in both the technical and the metaphorical sense simultaneously. The sunlight through the clerestory windows fades first to the deep amber of late afternoon, then to a warm orange that makes the stone walls look briefly like the interior of a lantern, and then, over the course of perhaps half an hour, it retreats entirely, the windows holding only the pale, neutral grey of early evening sky from which the colour has been withdrawn, but which has not yet deepened to darkness. In this interval, the bath complex operates in a mixed light, the natural light from the windows still present as a cool ground note, and over it, building steadily as the lamps are progressively lit by the workers making their evening rounds, the amber warmth of oil flame. By the time the last light leaves the clerestory windows, the interior of the bath complex is entirely lamplit, and it is a different place than it was in the afternoon. Not entirely different. The bones of it are the same, the stone, the water, the steam, the warmth from below, but the sensory character has shifted in every register simultaneously. The light is warmer and more intimate, throwing shadows that the diffuse daylight suppressed, making each column and arch and carved capital into a chiaroscuro study of its own. The sound has changed too, the crowd has thinned further, the remaining visitors fewer and quieter, the sounds of commerce and busy social interaction replaced by something more deliberate, more considered. The voices that remain are lower, unhurried, the voices of people who have chosen to stay into the evening because they have something specific to attend to here, a conversation of particular importance, a devotional practice. Simply the understanding that the bath in evening lamplight is something that the daytime bath is not, and that this particular quality of experience is worth staying for. The water in the great bath, lit only by lamps, loses the mineral colour variation that daylight revealed and becomes a single unified tone, dark and warm and deeply reflective, the lamp flames floating in it as doubled images, the original flames above and the reflected flames below separated by a layer of water, whose depth and darkness make the reflections seem not lesser than the originals but equally real. Two sets of flames, the ones burning in the air and the ones burning in the water, the upper world and its reflection held in conversation by the bath still surf. You sit at the pool's edge and watch the lamp fire in the water. This is one of those experiences that exceeds the language available to describe it, not because the language is inadequate, exactly, but because the experience is primarily physical and the description is primarily verbal, and the translation between these modes always involves some loss. What you see is the reflected flames. What you feel is the warmth from the water meeting the warmer air, the smooth stone beneath your hands, the particular quality of stillness that has gathered in the hall as the evening deepens. What you hear is the spring, always the spring, constant beneath everything, the heartbeat of the complex, and over it the soft conversation of other voices and the occasional small sound of water moving as someone adjusts their position in the pool. And underneath all of this sensory content, something that does not belong to any of the senses exactly, but that all of them together produce a quality of safety. A quality that is specifically the safety of being held by a place that has held many people before you and will hold many people after you, and that has, through this long practice of hospitality, developed a kind of profound equanimity about the whole business of human need. You are not the first frightened or tired or uncertain person to sit at this pool's edge and watch the lamplight on the water. You are not the first to arrive here carrying more than you meant to carry, to settle gradually under the influence of heat and stone and the sound of the spring, to feel the carrying become less effortful and then unnecessary, and then finally imperceptibly to set it down. The bath does not judge what you brought with you. It does not assess your fitness for receiving its comfort or determine whether your need is sufficiently serious to merit the attention of its waters. It is simply open as a spring is open, as a warm room is open, and you are simply here. And those two facts together are all that are required. Along the colonnade the evening lamps burn in their niches in the wall. Their flames are small and steady in the still interior air, each one a discrete point of warmth and light, each one the product of someone's morning care. The oil poured, the wick trimmed, the flame kindled. In the deepening dark outside the complex, the torches at the entrance have been lit, and the two who stand at the entrance to the sacred precinct hold their light against the night with the ordinary faithfulness of people who have been assigned this particular piece of the world to keep illuminated. Young woman, she came in earlier today. You noticed her in the tepidarium, new to the complex, slightly uncertain in her movements, has found herself a position on one of the stone benches along the ambulatory wall, and she is sitting with a quality of stillness that she did not have this morning. Her hands are open in her lap, her shoulders are level, her face turned toward the water, holds the expression of someone who has arrived somewhere they did not know they were looking for, and is not yet ready to name what the arrival means, but is content, for now, to simply be in it. That expression is perhaps the most recurring element of the bath's interior, more than the steam, more than the lamp fire, more than the sound of the spring. That particular quality of expression on the face of a person who has been given, for an hour or an afternoon or an entire long evening, the simple and extraordinary gift of warmth. It is in the face of the man who floats on his back in the centre of the pool, his eyes closed, the steam above him drifting in slow, beautiful circles. It is in the face of the priest who carries the bowl of sacred water across the precinct in the cool darkness. It is in the face of the old woman who tends the lamps, lifting the small oil vessel with practised hands, filling each lamp with the quiet efficiency of decades of practice. It is in the face of the spring itself. If a spring can be said to have a face rising endlessly, carrying its ancient warmth upward through the cold rock, arriving at the surface with the same unhurried abundance it has always brought. The dark outside the windows deepens. The lamps inside burn on. The night has come fully now. You can feel it in the quality of the silence outside the complex's walls, a silence that has a weight and a texture quite different from the daytime quiet, denser, more settled, more complete. The town around the Bath complex has drawn inward, the way towns do at night, the public life retreating into private spaces, the voices and footsteps and the sounds of commerce folding themselves into the domestic sounds of cooking and conversation, and children being encouraged towards sleep. Inside the complex, the night is warmth. The hypocausts have been running all day, and the stone of the walls and floors has absorbed that warmth so completely that even without the furnaces at full fire, they have been banked now for the night, traduced to a slow burn that will maintain the system rather than drive it. The building holds its heat the way the earth holds the heat of a long summer day, releasing it slowly, evenly, long after the source itself has quieted. The floors beneath your feet carry this stored warmth with the reliability of something that has been practicing the act of warmth for a very long time. The water in the great bath continues to rise. It will always continue to rise. Long after the lamps have burned down to their last trembling flame, long after the final attendant has made their evening rounds and retired to their quarters in the service wing, long after the last footfall has echoed from the ambulatory floor and found no answering footfall, the water will continue to rise. The spring has no nighttime, it has no seasons, it has no awareness of the human calendar that has organized the days around it into working hours and closing hours, and the specific temporal architecture of a Roman bath complex's daily routine. The spring simply is continuously the way breathing simply is, not a decision, not an achievement, but an ongoing condition of being alive. You have moved gradually, without quite deciding to one of the reclining benches in the tepidarium. The bench is stone beneath its cushioned cover, and the stone is warm and the cushion above the stone is soft with the compressible softness of wool that has been used many times and has found, through use, its settled, generous shape. You are lying on your back. The ceiling of the tepidarium arches above you a barrel vault, its stone surface textured by the centuries with a warmth and roughness that make it pleasant to look at, the way old wood is pleasant to look at, because its surface tells the story of the time it has endured without making drama of that story. The lamp nearest to where you lie has been burning long enough that its flame has settled into the deepest stillness that a flame achieves, no movement, no flicker, just the small steady orange light that seems to breathe once every few seconds in a rhythm so slow and gentle that it is only the most careful watching that detects it at all. The shadow it throws across the ceiling is your shadow, large and still, the shadow of a person at rest, the shadow of someone who has arrived somewhere they can stop. The sound of the spring reaches you here. It is lower at this hour than it was in the afternoon, not because the spring has changed its volume, The spring never changes its volume, but because the other sounds of the complex have receded so completely that the spring's voice now fills the space more fully, the way a single instrument fills a concert hall when all the others have been laid down. It is a low, constant, entirely consistent sound, the sound of water moving through stone, and it has been the bass note of every hour you have spent in this place. You realize now that you have been hearing it since you arrived without fully attending to it. It was always there beneath the voices and the commerce and the ceremony and the quiet conversations at the pool's edge, beneath all of it, patient and unchanging. You attend to it now. You let it be the thing you hear. It is warm, that sound, not metaphorically warm, actually warm, in the sense that sound itself can carry the quality of its source, can carry something of the heat of the water that makes it, the mineral richness, the deep earth origin. It is a sound that has been travelling upward through the rock for a very long time, and it has arrived at this air, this room, this particular quiet with the composure of something that has already completed a journey of extraordinary length and has no need to prove anything further. Your breathing has slowed. This is not a decision. The body, given warmth and stillness and the low constant sound of the spring, simply adjusts itself. The breath finds a longer, slower rhythm. The exhale extends a little past what it usually is. The pause between exhale and the next inhale grows by a moment, and that moment is not empty, it is full, dense with the warmth of the room and the sound of the water and the particular weight of rest that has been accumulating all afternoon, all evening, all the long warm hours of this bath. The lamp flame breathes. The water rises. Your body grows heavier in the good way, the way of a thing settling into its proper resting place, finding the alignment that sleep requires, the slight rearrangement of weight and position that happens automatically when the body knows it is safe to let go. The ceiling above you with its warm stone and its single moving shadow is the last thing you see clearly before the edges of seeing begin to soften. The carved cornice at the vault's edge, a simple repeated pattern of egg and dart, the most classical of architectural ornaments, each egg shape followed by its small pointed dart in patient alternation all the way around the room, is detailed and distinct to your eyes for a long moment, then its sharpness softens, the way all edges soften when the eye is no longer actively working but only receiving. The spring sounds, always. The warmth rises, always. You are in a place that has held 10,000 sleepers, 100,000 visitors, cities worth of ordinary afternoons and extraordinary moments. Tall of them folded now into the stone and the water and the lamp-warmed air. Then the place holds all of it without effort and without end. You are one more. You are received. Sleep, when it comes the way the spring comes, not from above, not announced, not dramatic in its arrival, from below. From somewhere deep and warm and patient, it rises slowly, filling the spaces between thoughts the way water fills the spaces between stones, with a gentleness that is the opposite of force and that, for that very reason, is entirely irresistible. The lamp, in the corner of the tepidarium, has burned low. The oil is nearly gone, and the flame has become something smaller than itself, a flicker rather than a flame, barely sufficient to mark the lamp's position in the darkness, but entirely sufficient for the purpose it serves now, which is not to illuminate anything but simply to be present, a small, living warmth at the edge of the sleeping room, a reminder that the world continues to hold its light even at its most diminished. The spring sounds. The spring has been sounding all along. Through the afternoon and the evening and the deepening night, through every conversation and ceremony and moment of quiet contemplation, through every hand pressed against the warm stone and every foot lowered into the warm water and every face tipped upward toward the steaming air, the spring has been sounding. It will be sounding when the morning light first finds its way through the clerestory windows and falls across the mosaic floor in the entrance hall, the light picking out each small tesserae tile with the gentle attentiveness of something that has all the time in the world. It will be sounding then, and you will hear it, and the hearing will be the first thing before thought, before memory, before the reconstruction of where you are and what day it is and what the day requires of you. But that is morning. This is now. This is the tepidarium in the deep of the night, the warm room in the warm complex, the lamplight that has been tended and the floors that hold their heat and the water that rises constantly from the deep places of the earth, warm and mineral-rich and endlessly patient. Your breathing is very slow. Through the nose, and notice one final time, the smell that has been the smell of this place since you first crossed the threshold, the mineral quality of the spring water, the cedarwood smoke, the olive oil, the incense from the temple altar carried on currents of warm air through corridors that have been carrying those currents for 2 centuries. It is a smell that has no equivalent in the modern world, no single thing you can point to and say, this is what it smells like. It is a compound of many things that exist separately in the world, but here are mixed in this specific proportion. And it is the smell of this specific place and no other. Out through the mouth. Slowly. In the spring room, which you cannot see from here, which is 2 corridors and a courtyard away, sealed behind its thick stone walls and the low murmur of the water, the sacred spring continues its rising. The water arrives at the surface with the same temperature it has always carried, the same mineral composition, the same slow upwelling pressure that the deep earth produces in this particular location for reasons that lie beneath the reach of any Roman understanding, and most modern understanding too. The water does not know it is sacred. The water does not know about the goddess whose temple stands above it, about the votive offerings floating at its depths, about the generations of humans who have organized their lives and their bodies and their spiritual attention around its arrival at the surface. The water only rises, and in its rising it creates everything. The warmth, the steam, the bath, the temple, the community of people gathered at the warmth, the conversations and ceremonies and the daily rituals of care, the oil in the lamps, the bread at the counters, the strigil moving across oiled skin, the faces of those who are restored, the tablets of those who petition, the inscriptions of those who give thanks. All of it rises with the water. All of it is carried on the warmth. You are carried on the warmth. The bench beneath you is warm, the air around you is warm, the ceiling above you with its barrel vault and its carved ornament is warm with the accumulated heat of the day, and this warmth is not diminishing, it is steady, held in the stone, in the good thick walls of a building made to last, and it will be here when you wake. The lamp flame makes one last small movement, a slight trembling, almost imperceptible, if breathing, and then settles again into its deep and steady burn. The spring sounds. Low, constant, warm. Sound that was here before you arrived and will be here after you leave, that has been here since before the foundations were laid, since before the first stone was quarried from the grey gold hills, since the very beginning of the slow geological process that made this particular patch of English ground so extraordinary, a sound that is in the most literal possible sense, the sound of the deep earth exhaling. Listen to it. Let the sound be the whole world. Let the warmth be the whole world. Let the low amber of the dying lamp be the whole world. There is no urgency here. There is no next thing. There is only this room, this warmth, this sound, this ancient and inexhaustible and endlessly patient spring, rising from the dark places of the earth to meet you here, this warm room, this warm night, exactly where you are. You do not need to go anywhere. You are already where the warmth is. You are already held. The spring rises. The spring rises. The spring rises. And you are carried on it gently, deeply into the warm and mineral dark, into the deepest sleep, into the place where even the sound of the water becomes a dream, and the dream becomes a warmth, and the warmth becomes the breath of the world itself, moving in and out with the slow and patient rhythm of something that will still be rising, still be warm, still be here, long after the dreaming has given way to the vast, unhurried silence of the deep and restful dark. Good night. balneum hic lavat corpus et animam. The bath washes here both body and soul. Welcome to Sleepy History with Henry. Here, we harness AI to breathe new life into authentic historical records, creating an immersive auditory experience. This entire production is AI-assisted, crafted solely for relaxation and sleep support. TAND is not a substitute for professional medical advice. Please do not listen while driving or operating machinery. Now, let Henry and AI guide you on a peaceful journey through the past.